Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to make a short call to support the contribution that was made by my colleague, Holly Walker, which highlights the fact that with this bill we are dealing with today, circumstances have changed since it was last debated in the House, and we can't address the issues in it and make this law, I don't think, unless we also address the issues that have been raised in the intervening time. I would like to thank David Parker for his assessment as the chair, I think, of the Select Committee at the time, and looking at and describing how the Evidence Act has an influence over this legislation. But we in the Greens are not convinced that there is sufficient exclusions, as he laid them out tonight, that provide the kinds of protections that we think are still very important and are even more important as a result of recent issues arised out of the Henry inquiry. Now, the part of the issue with the Henry inquiry, of course, is the behaviour of ministers in relation to it. And there has been a loss of trust by the public and I think by parliamentarians around the behaviour, particularly of the Prime Minister, in relation to the information that he's provided in terms of the Henry inquiry, the responsibility he's taken or indeed actually not taken for some of the actions of the inquiry. If you remember, there was that initial statement from the Prime Minister that Peter Dunne had given consent to his emails, for example, being taken by or provided to the inquiry. It turns out, in fact, there was no consent given. There was the issue around the extent to which the Prime Minister's office had been involved in seeking the details of Angie Vance's information, emails and movements around the parliamentary precincts. That was not disclosed by the Prime Minister until much later, when it was revealed, in fact, that his office was involved in that. These kinds of behaviours by ministers who are responsible for these kinds of inquiries reduces the trust that the community has that these inquiries are not politically driven, will not be interfered with by ministers. And given the wide-ranging powers that this inquiries bill provides for an inquiry, should it pass, I think there are real concerns about genuine checks and balances. Our biggest concern, we are of the view that the Official Information Act should apply to parliamentary services, that people should be able to get information about what parliamentary services are doing, and that does, in fact, apply to MPs' offices. But one of the areas we are absolutely certain ought to be protected are the communications between MPs and their constituents, because it's crucial for constituents to have free access to the MPs to talk about the issues that are important to them. This bill does nothing to allay our concern about that. In fact, it would apply to MPs as it is currently written and to all communications that all MPs make at any time in their role as a Member of Parliament. Neither does this bill provide any protections, as far as we can see, even with the description of the implication of the Evidence Act, to protect a journalist's sources. And so these are issues that need to be dealt with. The problem is, of course, is that this government wants to rush this legislation through. I understand that the government intends to have the third reading this week. So therefore there will not be sufficient scrutiny of this bill to make sure that the powers are not too wide. There will not be sufficient consideration of the impacts of the Henry inquiry debacle on inquiries and the powers that were provided to ministers and to these inquiries. There will not be the opportunity for the media to make comment as to whether or not they think this bill extends powers too far, particularly for them in protecting their sources. And neither is there the opportunity for the public to re-engage in this debate about what kind of powers should a politically driven, a ministerial-driven inquiry be able to have in obtaining information about them. At the time that we are seeing the GCSB debacle again occur, where people are particularly concerned to keep private information private and their right to do so, this bill raises real issues. If this government wants to push it through, then I think there are very serious concerns about supporting this bill over the next period of time, unless these issues can be seriously dealt with. We see no evidence from government that they intend to deal with these issues seriously. That is very unfortunate. We are abstaining on this legislation until we feel confident that these issues have been seriously dealt with by government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ko Dr. Jiang Yang. Mr. Speaker, I rise to take a short call on the second reading of the inquiries bill. Previous speakers